The screeching tires echoed through the rainy Memphis night as the SUV hydroplaned on Interstate 40. Sarah Carter tried desperately to regain control, but it was too late. The vehicle slammed into the concrete barrier with devastating force. In the backseat, 2-year-old Emma screamed as glass shattered around her like deadly confetti. The world became a blur of spinning lights, crunching metal, and her mother's final gasp before silence consumed everything. When firefighters arrived at the scene, they found Sarah unresponsive, slumped over the deployed airbag. In the backseat, Emma sat motionless in her car seat, eyes wide open but unseeing, covered in tiny cuts from the shattered window but miraculously without serious physical injury. The emergency responders worked frantically, their radios crackling with urgent communications. One of them, a veteran firefighter named Marcus, carefully extracted Emma from the wreckage, wrapping her in a blanket despite the warm September night. She was shaking uncontrollably, her little body rigid with terror. Her father, David, a decorated firefighter who'd been on shift at Station 19 across town that night, arrived to find his entire world shattered into pieces smaller than the glass scattered across the wet pavement. His wife was gone, pronounced dead at the scene from massive internal injuries. His daughter had retreated into a shell of silence, so profound that the paramedics initially feared she might be in shock requiring hospitalization. David held Emma against his chest in the back of the ambulance, feeling her rapid heartbeat against his own breaking heart, and whispered promises he wasn't sure he could keep. "Everything's going to be okay, baby girl. Daddy's here. Daddy's got you." But everything wasn't okay. In the days following Sarah's funeral, David discovered that his vibrant, chattering daughter who once narrated every moment of her day had essentially stopped speaking. Emma would occasionally whisper single words to him: water, blanket, no, but the streams of consciousness, the endless questions, the songs she used to sing while playing with her dolls had vanished completely. At daycare, she sat alone in the corner, unresponsive to teachers and other children. Her pediatrician assured David this was a normal trauma response, that with time and patience, Emma would recover. But the months crawled by with agonizing slowness, and Emma's silence persisted. David, drowning in his own grief, struggled to reach his daughter across the chasm that the accident had created between them. He took a leave of absence from the fire department, depleting his savings to stay home with Emma. He read her favorite books, played her favorite movies, made her favorite foods, mac and cheese shaped like dinosaurs, but received only hollow stares in return. The nightmares began 3 weeks after the accident. Every night, sometimes multiple times per night, Emma would wake screaming. Not words, just raw, primal shrieks of terror that sent David running to her room. He'd find her sitting bolt upright in bed, eyes open but not seeing him, reliving the crash over and over in her traumatized mind. He'd hold her, rock her, sing to her, but nothing seemed to reach through the wall of fear. The bags under David's eyes grew darker. His hands trembled from exhaustion. His captain called regularly, concerned, but David couldn't imagine returning to work when his daughter needed him so desperately. He tried everything. Play therapy with Dr. Rebecca Winters, who specialized in childhood trauma. Emma would sit on the floor, staring at the toys but never touching them. Art therapy with a kind woman named Melissa who provided crayons and paper. Emma drew the same thing every session, black scribbles covering the entire page. Music therapy, sensory therapy, even a child psychologist who prescribed mild anti-anxiety medication that did absolutely nothing except make Emma drowsy. 14 months after the accident, David sat in Dr. Rachel Morrison's office, a therapist who'd been recommended by Emma's pediatrician as a last resort. Dr. Morrison was different from the others, younger, with warm brown eyes and an easy smile that didn't feel practiced. She listened to David's story without interrupting, without taking notes, just fully present in a way that made him feel heard for the first time since Sarah's death. "I don't know what else to do," David admitted, his voice cracking. "She's slipping away from me and I can't reach her. I'm losing my daughter and I already lost my wife." Dr. Morrison leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "Have you ever considered animal-assisted therapy?" David blinked. "Like a therapy dog." "Exactly like a therapy dog. I work with an organization called Second Chance Service Dogs. They rescue animals and train them specifically for trauma survivors, including children. There's something about the unconditional acceptance of a dog that can break through walls that humans can't penetrate. They don't expect anything. They don't judge. They just are." David was skeptical. He'd never been a dog person. Sarah had wanted to get a puppy for Emma's 3rd birthday, but David had resisted, citing their busy schedules and small apartment. The irony wasn't lost on him now. He'd said no to something that might have brought his wife joy in her final months. "I don't know," he said slowly. "Our apartment doesn't allow pets." "So move," Dr. Morrison said simply. "David, I've seen Emma's file. I've read every report from every therapist she's seen. Nothing is working because Emma has locked herself away in the safest place she knows, inside herself, where the crash can't reach her. But that isolation is destroying her development, her ability to connect, her future. A therapy dog might be the key that unlocks that door." That conversation happened on a Tuesday. By Friday, David had given notice on his apartment and put a deposit on a small house with a fenced backyard in a quiet neighborhood near Overton Park. The landlord had initially refused to allow a dog, but when David explained it was for his traumatized daughter, the man's expression softened. He had a granddaughter about Emma's age. "One dog," the landlord said, "and if there are any problems—" "There won't be," David promised. Dr. Morrison connected David with Michelle Santos, the head trainer at Second Chance Service Dogs. Michelle was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd been training service animals for over 20 years. She came to evaluate Emma at their new house, watching quietly as the little girl sat on the couch, staring at nothing. "I have someone in mind," Michelle said after an hour of observation. "His name is Ranger. He's 6 years old, golden retriever, found abandoned at a truck stop about 3 years ago. Nearly starved to death. Trust issues with men initially, but we worked through it. He's been through advanced therapy training, and there's something special about him. He seems to know exactly what people need, even before they know it themselves." 3 weeks later, on a crisp October morning, Michelle Santos pulled up in front of David's house in a van with Second Chance Service Dogs painted on the side. David, who'd barely slept the night before from anxiety about whether this would work or just be another disappointment, opened the door. Emma stood beside him in her purple unicorn pajamas, her hand gripping his pant leg. Michelle opened the van's back door, and out bounded a beautiful golden retriever with intelligent amber eyes and a wagging tail. Ranger stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, sitting automatically, looking up at them with what could only be described as gentle curiosity. Emma's grip on David's pants loosened. She took one step forward, then another. David held his breath, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever spell was unfolding. Emma walked down the 3 porch steps by herself, something she rarely did anymore without clinging to his hand, and approached the dog. Ranger remained perfectly still, his tail giving the smallest wag. Emma reached out a tentative hand and touched the soft fur on his head. The dog leaned slightly into her touch, and Emma's eyes, those haunted eyes that had been empty for so long, flickered with something David hadn't seen in 14 months. Interest. "Hi," Emma whispered to the dog. Just that one word, but it was unprompted, voluntary, directed at another living being. David's vision blurred with tears. Michelle smiled knowingly beside him. "I told you," she said softly. "Ranger knows." That first day, Ranger explored the house calmly while Emma followed him from room to room, maintaining a careful distance but never taking her eyes off him. When David prepared lunch, grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, Emma sat at the table while Ranger lay nearby. For the first time in months, Emma ate without being coaxed, distracted from her usual mealtime anxiety by the dog's presence. That first night changed everything. David had prepared a dog bed in the living room, following Michelle's instructions to establish boundaries and routines. He'd gone through the evening ritual, bath time, pajamas, a story that Emma stared through without reaction, and tucked her into bed. He left Ranger downstairs and retreated to his own room, exhausted as always. At 2:47 a.m., Emma's screams shattered the quiet house. David bolted from his bed, his heart pounding, running on autopilot toward his daughter's room. But when he burst through her door, he froze. Ranger was already there. The dog had somehow opened Emma's bedroom door. David later realized he hadn't latched it completely, and had jumped onto Emma's bed. The golden retriever was lying beside Emma, his head resting gently on her chest, his weight providing pressure therapy that David had read about but never successfully implemented. Emma's hands were buried in Ranger's fur, her screams fading to whimpers, her breathing starting to slow. David stood in the doorway, watching in amazement as his daughter's panic attack subsided under the steady, calm presence of this remarkable animal. Emma's eyes, which usually stayed wide and terrified for an hour after these episodes, began to flutter closed. Her grip on Ranger's fur relaxed but didn't release. "Good boy," Emma whispered into the darkness, her voice small but clear. "Good boy, Ranger." David sank to his knees right there in the hallway, pressing his hand over his mouth to stifle the sob of relief and hope that rose in his throat. For the first time since the night of the accident, he felt something other than helpless despair. He felt hope. Ranger wasn't a typical therapy dog, and his journey to Emma's life had been just as remarkable as the transformation he was about to bring. 3 years earlier, a truck driver named Bill Henderson had pulled into a rest stop outside Little Rock, Arkansas, looking for nothing more than bad coffee and a bathroom break. What he found instead was a skeletal golden retriever tied to a dumpster with a frayed rope, ribs showing through matted fur, eyes dull with resignation and starvation. Bill, a dog lover who had 3 rescues at home, couldn't drive away. He called animal control, waited 2 hours in the parking lot, and personally delivered the abandoned dog to the county shelter. The veterinarian who examined the retriever, later estimated to be about 3 years old, discovered infections, malnutrition, and evidence of prolonged neglect. The dog should have been aggressive, traumatized, broken. Instead, when the vet gently examined his infected paws, the retriever simply looked up at her with those amber eyes and wagged his tail once, as if saying, "I know you're trying to help." That's where Michelle Santos found him. Michelle visited shelters throughout Arkansas and Tennessee regularly, looking for dogs with potential for service training. Most people wanted puppies, blank slates they could mold. Michelle preferred rescues. She believed dogs who'd suffered and survived had a unique capacity for empathy, an understanding of pain that made them exceptional healers. She saw something extraordinary in the nameless golden retriever. Despite everything he'd endured, there was no aggression, no fear-biting, no cowering. Just a quiet dignity and an almost uncanny ability to read human emotion. When Michelle sat on the shelter floor to meet him, the dog approached slowly, rested his head in her lap, and looked up at her as if he'd been waiting for her all along. "I'll take him," Michelle told the shelter coordinator. "This one's special." She named him Ranger, after her father, a park ranger who taught her that the greatest strength wasn't in dominating nature, but in understanding and respecting it. For 2 years, Michelle worked with Ranger, discovering that her initial instinct had been absolutely correct. This dog possessed an almost supernatural ability to sense emotional distress in humans. During training sessions, if another handler became frustrated or upset, Ranger would abandon whatever task he was performing and go directly to that person, offering comfort without being asked. He excelled at every aspect of therapy dog training. He learned to apply deep pressure therapy for anxiety attacks, to wake people from nightmares with gentle persistence, to remain calm in chaotic environments. But more than the technical skills, Ranger had intuition. He could distinguish between physical and emotional pain, adjusting his response accordingly. He seemed to know exactly how much pressure to apply, when to be playful and when to be still, when someone needed space and when they needed contact. Michelle had placed Ranger with two families before Emma. The first was a veteran with PTSD who ultimately moved across the country for a job and couldn't take Ranger due to housing restrictions. The second was an elderly woman with dementia whose condition progressed to the point where she needed to move into memory care. Both families had wept when returning Ranger to Michelle, crediting him with months of stability and peace. Michelle had been waiting for the right permanent placement, and when Dr. Rachel Morrison called about a traumatized 3-year-old who'd stopped speaking, Michelle knew immediately that Ranger had found his purpose. Now, 3 weeks after that first meeting on David's porch, the transformation in Emma was nothing short of miraculous. Every morning, she woke to find Ranger sleeping on the floor beside her bed. David had purchased an orthopedic dog bed and placed it there after that first night. Emma's initial action each day was no longer silent tears or vacant staring, but reaching down to scratch Ranger behind his ears. "Good morning, Ranger," she'd whisper, and the dog's tail would thump against the floor. The morning routine became a structured dance. Emma would get out of bed and Ranger would follow her to the bathroom, waiting patiently outside the door. When she emerged, he'd walk beside her to the kitchen where David had breakfast ready. Emma started eating without resistance, often talking to Ranger throughout the meal. "I'm having scrambled eggs, Ranger. Do you like eggs? Daddy makes good eggs, but not as good as Mommy used to make." The words would tumble out naturally, unconsciously, directed at the dog who sat attentively beside her chair. David would stand at the stove, his back to them, tears streaming silently down his face as he heard his daughter's voice filling their home again. The conversations Emma had with Ranger were extraordinary. She told him everything, her fears, her memories, her dreams. Things she wouldn't or couldn't tell the therapists, the doctors, or even David poured out to this patient, non-judgmental listener with the amber eyes and soft fur. "Sometimes I dream about the crash," Emma told Ranger one afternoon as they sat together in the backyard. David was nearby, pretending to garden but listening to every word. "The car goes round and there's all this noise. Mommy's there but then she's not. It's really scary, Ranger. But when you're there, when I wake up and you're there, the scary goes away faster. Why does it go away faster with you?" Ranger tilted his head, a gesture he made frequently, as if genuinely considering her question. Emma giggled, a sound so precious that David had to turn away, overcome with emotion. Dr. Morrison, who now visited weekly to observe Emma's progress, was astounded. "In 20 years of practice, I've never seen such a rapid breakthrough," she told David during one of their sessions while Emma and Ranger played in the next room. "The bond they've formed is textbook animal-assisted therapy, but accelerated. Emma feels safe with Ranger in a way she can't feel with humans right now, and that safety is allowing her to process her trauma." "But she still barely talks to people," David said, worry creasing his forehead. "At preschool, her teachers say she's still withdrawn. She only speaks to me in single words, and even that's rare. It's only with Ranger that she really talks." "That's actually progress, David. Emma is rebuilding her capacity for communication and trust. She's starting with Ranger because he's the safest option. He'll never leave her, never hurt her, never die in a car crash. Once she fully trusts that foundation, she'll expand outward. These things take time." Time proved Dr. Morrison right. For weeks after Ranger's arrival, Emma spoke her first full sentence to someone other than the dog. David was tucking her in, Ranger already settled on his bed beside hers, when Emma looked up at her father and said clearly, "Ranger loves me, and I love him, and I love you too, Daddy." David's composure shattered. He pulled Emma into his arms, holding her tight while she wrapped her small arms around his neck. "I love you so much, baby girl," he whispered. So much." At preschool, the changes came more slowly, but they came. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, reported that Emma had started participating in circle time, not speaking but making eye contact, nodding when asked questions. She'd begun playing alongside other children, still parallel play rather than interactive, but it was progress. When Mrs. Rodriguez showed Emma a picture book about dogs, Emma had pointed at a golden retriever and said, "Ranger." Michelle Santos visited regularly to check on Ranger and assess the placement. During one visit, about 2 months after Ranger moved in, she put Ranger through his paces, testing his continued training and responsiveness. Emma watched anxiously from the porch. "Is Ranger leaving?" Emma asked David, her voice tight with fear. "No, sweetheart. Michelle just wants to make sure Ranger is happy here." "He is happy. I make him happy. He makes me happy. He's not leaving." Emma's voice rose with panic. Michelle, overhearing this, stopped the assessment immediately. She walked over to Emma and knelt down. "Emma, I promise you Ranger is yours. He's not going anywhere. I just need to check that he's healthy and doing his job well. And do you know what? He's doing the best job I've ever seen any therapy dog do. You two are perfect together." Emma studied Michelle's face, then looked at Ranger, who trotted over to sit beside her. The dog leaned against Emma's legs and the little girl's hand automatically went to his head. "Okay," she said finally, "but he's mine." "He absolutely is," Michelle confirmed, smiling. That night something beautiful happened. Emma was in bed and David was reading her favorite story, Where the Wild Things Are, when Emma interrupted him. "Daddy, can I read to Ranger?" David's heart skipped. "You want to read?" "Ranger likes stories. I want to read him a story." David helped Emma choose a simple book, Goodnight Moon, and watched as his daughter sat on her bed with Ranger's head in her lap, carefully sounding out words she'd memorized from countless readings. The dog lay perfectly still, his eyes on Emma's face, as if he truly was listening to every word. "Goodnight room, goodnight moon, goodnight cow jumping over the moon." Emma's small voice filled the bedroom. When she finished, she closed the book and announced to Ranger, "That was a good story. Tomorrow I'll read you a different one." It became their nightly ritual. After David read Emma her bedtime story, Emma would read to Ranger. Sometimes she'd make up stories if the book was too difficult, narrating adventures about a brave dog named Ranger who rescued people and made them feel safe. David would stand in the hallway, listening, marveling at the healing happening in that small bedroom. The nightmares didn't disappear, but their frequency decreased. When they did occur, Ranger's response was immediate and effective. He'd wake Emma with gentle licks to her face, then position himself across her lap, his weight grounding her to reality. Emma would wrap her arms around him, bury her face in his fur, and the terror would recede. Some nights, David would hear Emma talking to Ranger in the darkness. "I'm scared, Ranger. The dream was bad tonight. There was so much noise and glass, but you're here. You're real. The crash is gone, but you're here." The dog would huff softly and Emma's breathing would slow. 3 months after Ranger entered their lives, David returned to work part-time. He'd been terrified to leave Emma, but his savings were depleted and his captain had been incredibly patient. He started with just one 24-hour shift per week. Mrs. Chen, their elderly neighbor, agreed to stay overnight with Emma while David was at the station. That first night apart was agony for David. He called every 2 hours, but Mrs. Chen reported the same thing each time. "She's fine, David. She and that wonderful dog are reading books. She ate all her dinner. She's absolutely fine." When David came home the next morning, exhausted from a night of emergency calls and worry, he found Emma and Ranger in the backyard. Emma was throwing a tennis ball and Ranger was retrieving it, his tail wagging with joy. When Emma saw her father, she ran to him. "Daddy, Ranger fetched the ball 17 times, I counted." David scooped her up, overwhelmed with relief and gratitude. His daughter was still here. She was still his Emma. And she was healing, one day, one word, one game of fetch at a time, All because of a remarkable dog who'd been abandoned at a truck stop and had somehow found his way to exactly where he was needed most. Margaret Hayes had always been a formidable woman. At 62, with steel-gray hair styled in an immaculate bob and a wardrobe of tailored suits that could intimidate corporate executives, she commanded respect wherever she went. As the recently retired principal of Westwood Elementary School, she'd spent 35 years shaping young minds with an iron fist wrapped in velvet gloves. Parents feared her. Teachers respected her. Students obeyed her. Margaret believed in structure, discipline, and proper order, values she credited for her successful career, and what she considered her exemplary parenting of her only daughter, Sarah. Sarah's death had destroyed something fundamental in Margaret. The funeral had been a blur of black clothes and pitying glances, but what came after was worse. The endless, empty days of retirement that she'd planned to fill with lunches with her daughter, shopping trips, and eventually babysitting grandchildren in a proper, stable environment. Instead, she had a silent granddaughter being raised by a man Margaret had never fully trusted. David Carter had never been good enough for Sarah in Margaret's estimation. A firefighter, noble work certainly, but hardly the professional career Margaret had envisioned for her daughter. Sarah had been class valedictorian, full scholarship to Vanderbilt, destined for law school or medicine. Instead, she'd fallen for David's easy smile and working-class charm, gotten pregnant unexpectedly, and married him in a simple ceremony that Margaret still felt was beneath her daughter's potential. "He's a good man, Mother," Sarah had insisted during one of their many arguments about the relationship. "He loves me. He makes me happy." But Margaret saw only what David lacked: the prestigious degree, the impressive salary, the country club membership, the social connections that Margaret valued. She'd tolerated him for Sarah's sake, maintaining a cool civility that everyone pretended was warmth. Now, sitting in her pristine living room in her Germantown estate, Margaret watched through the window as her husband Robert tended his rose garden. The house was too big, too quiet, too empty. Sarah's childhood bedroom remained exactly as she'd left it before college, a shrine Margaret couldn't bear to change. Emma should be here, Margaret thought, not in some rental house with a man who worked dangerous 24-hour shifts and apparently thought a dog was an acceptable substitute for proper childcare. The breaking point came on a Wednesday morning in late November. Margaret had called David to arrange her weekly visit with Emma, an arrangement they'd settled into after Sarah's death, though Margaret felt once a week was woefully insufficient. David's phone went to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. On the third attempt he answered, and Margaret could hear chaos in the background, sirens, shouting, the unmistakable sounds of an emergency scene. "Margaret, I can't talk right now. I'm at a 4-alarm fire." "Where is Emma?" Margaret's voice was ice. "She's with Mrs. Chen next door. She's fine." "You left my granddaughter with a neighbor, a woman I've never even met." "Mrs. Chen is wonderful. Emma loves her. And Margaret, I really have to go." The line went dead. Margaret sat frozen, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. In her mind, she saw Emma alone, frightened, abandoned by a father who chose his job over his child. Never mind that firefighters didn't choose when emergencies occurred. Never mind that David had arranged reliable, loving care. Margaret saw only what fit her narrative. Emma needed her, and David was failing. That evening, Margaret drove to David's house unannounced. It was a modest, single-story home in a middle-class neighborhood, nothing like the spacious estate where Sarah had grown up. The yard needed work. The paint was fading. Margaret's lip curled with disapproval as she rang the doorbell. David answered, still in his fire department t-shirt, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. "Margaret, I wasn't expecting you." Clearly, she pushed past him into the house. "I'd like to see Emma." Emma was in the living room, sitting on the floor with Ranger, surrounded by picture books. When she saw her grandmother, her body tensed slightly, though she managed a small, "Hi, Grandma." Margaret's eyes fixed on the dog, a large, shedding animal that was currently drooling on her granddaughter's pajamas. "Emma, sweetheart, why don't you go wash your hands? You've been touching that dirty animal." "Ranger's not dirty," Emma said quietly, her hand protectively on the dog's head. "Nevertheless, wash your hands. Now, please." Emma looked at her father, who nodded gently. She stood and walked toward the bathroom, Ranger following closely behind her. Margaret watched them go, her disapproval deepening. "She's too attached to that animal," Margaret said the moment Emma was out of earshot. "It's not healthy. And speaking of health, this house, David, there's dog hair everywhere. The yard is unkempt. Emma told me she had cereal for dinner last night." "I worked a double shift because Jenkins had a family emergency," David said, his patience thinning. "Emma had cereal because that's what she wanted, and Mrs. Chen made sure she also had fruit and milk. Emma is fine, Margaret." "Emma is not fine," Margaret's composure cracked. "She barely speaks to anyone but that dog. She's withdrawn at school. She needs stability, proper nutrition, a consistent schedule, educational enrichment." "She needs time to heal from watching her mother die," David interrupted, his voice hard. "She needs love and patience and support, which she's getting. The dog is therapy, prescribed by her psychologist. Emma has made more progress in 3 months with Ranger than in a year with every other treatment we tried." Margaret drew herself up to her full height. "I think you're overwhelmed, David. I think you're doing your best, but your best isn't enough. Emma needs more than you can provide." "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying that perhaps Emma should come live with Robert and me. Temporarily, of course, just until you get yourself sorted. We have plenty of space. I'm retired, so I'd be there full time. Robert and I can provide structure, proper meals, educational activities." "Absolutely not." David's voice was steel. "Emma is my daughter. She's staying with me." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." The conversation ended badly, with Margaret leaving in angry silence. But her words haunted David through his next shift. He confided in his captain, Marcus Williams, a 20-year veteran with 3 kids of his own. "She can't just take Emma, can she?" David asked, the fear evident in his voice. Marcus's expression was grim. "She can try. Grandparents' rights are a real thing in Tennessee, especially when one parent is deceased. If she gets a lawyer and argues you're unfit." "I'm not unfit. Emma is thriving." "I know that, brother. But courts look at stability and a single dad working 72-hour weeks, daughter with ongoing selective mutism, relying on a dog for therapy. A good lawyer could spin that badly." David's blood ran cold. "What do I do?" "Document everything. Emma's progress with her therapist, the recommendations for Ranger, Mrs. Chen's care. Get ahead of this. And David, maybe talk to a lawyer yourself just in case." But David didn't have money for lawyers. Between Sarah's medical bills from the accident, the funeral costs, moving expenses, and reduced hours at work, his savings were nearly gone. He pushed the worry aside, convincing himself that Margaret was just grieving, that she'd calm down, that no judge would take a child from a loving father. He was wrong. 3 weeks later, 2 days after Christmas, a process server arrived at David's door. Margaret Hayes, represented by Blackwood and Associates, one of Memphis's most prestigious family law firms, was filing for full custody of Emma Rose Carter. The petition was brutal in its thoroughness. It documented David's work schedule, noting the 72-hour weeks and overnight shifts. It included statements from Emma's preschool teacher about her continued selective mutism and social withdrawal. It cited reliance on animal companionship in lieu of proper therapeutic intervention, and unstable living conditions, and inadequate supervision. David read the document 3 times, each reading making him feel sicker. A court date was set for January 15th, less than 3 weeks away. He was assigned a public defender, Jessica Torres, a young attorney fresh out of law school who was handling 47 cases simultaneously. They met in a cramped office at the courthouse. Jessica was professional but honest. "Mr. Carter, I'm going to be straight with you. Thomas Blackwood is representing Mrs. Hayes. He's one of the most successful family attorneys in Tennessee, and he specializes in custody cases. His win rate is above 90%. But Emma is my daughter. I'm a good father." "I believe you. But Blackwood will paint a picture of a struggling single parent who works dangerous, inconsistent hours and has placed his daughter's emotional welfare in the hands of a dog. He'll contrast that with Mrs. Hayes, a retired educator with unlimited time, financial resources, a stable home environment, and no work obligations. But Emma needs Ranger. She's finally healing." Jessica made notes. "We'll get Dr. Morrison to testify about Emma's progress. We'll emphasize the bond you have with your daughter. But David, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that the judge might side with Mrs. Hayes, at least for temporary custody pending further evaluation." David left that meeting in a daze. He picked Emma up from preschool, where she ran to him with Ranger's leash in her small hand. David had arranged for Emma to bring Ranger to school twice a week as part of her therapy plan, and it was the only time she seemed truly relaxed there. "Daddy, Ranger helped me today," Emma said as they walked to the car. "I was scared during story time because the book had a car crash in it, and my tummy felt funny, but Ranger came and put his head on my lap and the scary feeling went away." David buckled her into her car seat, his heart breaking. "That's wonderful, baby girl. Ranger's a very good dog." "The best dog," Emma agreed. "Daddy, why do you look sad?" "I'm just tired, sweetheart. Everything's fine." But everything wasn't fine. That night, after Emma and Ranger were asleep, David sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at the custody petition. He thought about Sarah, about what she would want. She would want Emma to be happy, healthy, healing. And Emma was those things, finally, because of Ranger. The next morning, David called his fire station and requested to speak with every colleague who'd witnessed his dedication as a father. He called Mrs. Chen and asked if she'd be willing to testify. He called Dr. Morrison and begged her to make the strongest case possible for Emma's need for Ranger and for stability in her current environment. "I'll do everything I can," Dr. Morrison promised. "Emma's progress has been remarkable. Any competent judge should see that removing her from her current situation would be devastating." But as the court date approached, David's anxiety grew. He couldn't eat. He couldn't sleep. He watched Emma playing with Ranger in the backyard and imagined Margaret's sterile, dog-free home where Emma would retreat back into silence, where all the progress would unravel. 3 days before the hearing, Emma found David sitting on the porch steps after she'd gone to bed, his head in his hands. She'd gotten up for water, noticed he wasn't inside, and came looking for him with Ranger at her side. "Daddy, why are you crying?" David quickly wiped his eyes. "I'm okay, Emmy, just thinking about grown-up stuff." Emma sat down beside him and Ranger settled at their feet. "Is it about Grandma? I heard you talking on the phone. Grandma wants me to live at her house." David's breath caught. "Emma, I don't want to live at Grandma's house. Ranger can't go there and you won't be there." Emma's small hand found his. "I want to stay here with you and Ranger. We're a family." David pulled his daughter close, tears streaming freely now. "We are a family, baby girl, and I'm going to fight to keep us together. I promise." Judge Catherine Reynolds had presided over family court for 18 years, and she developed a reputation that made attorneys nervous. Fair but exacting, she had zero tolerance for games, manipulation, or using children as pawns in adult conflicts. At 56, with sharp green eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and an expression that gave away nothing, she'd seen every custody argument imaginable. She'd reunited families and torn them apart. She'd made decisions that haunted her and decisions she knew were right even when they broke hearts. The Hayes v. Carter custody hearing began on a bitter January morning. Outside, frost coated the windows of the Davidson County Courthouse. Inside courtroom 4B, the air was thick with tension and the artificial warmth of overworked heating vents. The fluorescent lights cast everything in harsh, unforgiving brightness. David arrived early, wearing the only suit he owned, a navy blue one he'd worn to his wedding and then to Sarah's funeral. It felt too tight around the shoulders now, or maybe that was just the anxiety constricting his chest. Jessica Torres met him in the hallway, her arms full of file folders, her expression professionally neutral but her eyes sympathetic. "Remember what we discussed," Jessica said quietly. "Stay calm, answer questions directly, don't let Blackwood provoke you into anger, judges notice everything." David nodded, not trusting his voice. Through the courtroom's glass door, he could see Margaret already seated at the plaintiff's table, perfectly composed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than David's monthly rent. Beside her sat Thomas Blackwood, 60-something, silver-haired, with the predatory confidence of a man who rarely lost. At exactly 9 o'clock, the bailiff called the court to order. Everyone rose as Judge Reynolds entered, her black robe swishing as she took her seat at the bench. She surveyed the courtroom with those penetrating eyes, and David felt like she could see straight through to his terror. "Be seated," Judge Reynolds said. "We're here for Hayes versus Carter, case number JV 2025-1147, a petition for custody modification. Mr. Blackwood, you may begin." Thomas Blackwood stood with theatrical precision. "Thank you, Your Honor. This is a straightforward case about what's best for 3-year-old Emma Rose Carter. My client, Margaret Hayes, is the maternal grandmother who seeks primary custody due to serious concerns about the child's welfare and development under her father's care." For the next 20 minutes, Blackwood laid out his case with devastating efficiency. He spoke of David's erratic and demanding work schedule, painting a picture of a child left with neighbors and babysitters while her father fought fires across the city. He emphasized Emma's continued selective mutism, framing it as evidence of inadequate care rather than trauma recovery. "Your Honor, this child witnessed her mother's death in a horrific accident. That trauma requires professional, consistent therapeutic intervention. Instead, Mr. Carter has essentially outsourced his daughter's emotional care to a dog." Blackwood's tone dripped with disdain on that last word. Jessica objected. "Your Honor, Ranger is a certified therapy dog prescribed by Emma's psychologist." "I'll address that in my presentation, Ms. Torres," Blackwood interrupted smoothly. "Your Honor, may I call my first witness?" Judge Reynolds nodded. "Proceed." Emma's preschool teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, took the stand. She was a kind woman in her 40s who taught for 15 years, and she looked deeply uncomfortable as Blackwood approached. "Mrs. Rodriguez, how would you characterize Emma Carter's social development?" Mrs. Rodriguez shifted in her seat. "Emma is a sweet child, but she struggles with verbal communication and peer interaction." "Does she speak in class?" "Rarely, mostly to whisper answers when directly asked." "Does she play with other children?" "She engages in parallel play, playing alongside others rather than with them." "Would you say Emma exhibits signs of developmental delay or emotional distress?" "Objection," Jessica interjected. "Mrs. Rodriguez isn't qualified to diagnose." "Sustained," Judge Reynolds said. "Rephrase, Mr. Blackwood." "Does Emma's behavior concern you as an educator?" Mrs. Rodriguez hesitated. "I'm concerned about her social integration, yes, but I've also seen improvement since she started bringing her therapy dog to school." "Thank you, that's all." Blackwood cut her off before she could elaborate on the positive changes. Jessica's cross-examination highlighted Emma's progress, how she'd gone from completely nonverbal at school to at least making eye contact and whispering responses. But the damage was done. Judge Reynolds made notes, her expression unreadable. Next, Blackwood called a child psychologist he'd hired, Dr. Franklin Webb, who'd never met Emma but had reviewed her case file. Dr. Webb testified that prolonged selective mutism could indicate insufficient therapeutic support, and that over-reliance on animal companionship might actually impede human social development. Isn't it true, Dr. Webb, that children need consistent human interaction and professional therapeutic intervention to overcome trauma? Absolutely. While animal-assisted therapy can be beneficial as a supplement, it shouldn't replace proper psychological treatment. Jessica's cross-examination exposed that Dr. Webb had never evaluated Emma personally and was unaware of her actual treatment plan, which included both Dr. Morrison's therapy and Ranger's support. But again, reasonable doubt had been planted. Then Blackwood played his master stroke. He called David to the stand. David's hands trembled as he was sworn in. Blackwood circled like a shark who'd scented blood. "Mr. Carter, how many hours per week do you work?" "I work 3 24-hour shifts, so 72 hours. 72 hours per week away from your daughter. That's 3 full days and nights, correct?" "Yes, but that's standard for firefighters. I'm home 4 days." "During these 72 hours, who cares for Emma?" "Mrs. Chen, our neighbor. She's wonderful with Emma." "A neighbor, not a licensed childcare provider, not a family member, a neighbor." Blackwood's emphasis made it sound sordid. "Mrs. Chen is loving and responsible. Emma adores her." "Mr. Carter, you're a firefighter. You run into burning buildings. You respond to car accidents, medical emergencies, hazardous material situations. Dangerous work, wouldn't you say?" David's jaw tightened. He knew where this was going. "It's my job, I serve my community." "Noble, certainly. But if something happened to you, God forbid, Emma would be orphaned. Have you considered that when choosing to continue such hazardous employment?" "Objection," Jessica stood. "Your Honor, this is inflammatory. Mr. Carter's occupation is legal and honorable." "I'll allow it," Judge Reynolds said. "The witness may answer." David forced himself to stay calm. "I've considered it. I have life insurance. Emma would be provided for, but I'm careful, I'm trained, and I come home to my daughter." Blackwood shifted tactics. "Let's talk about Emma's therapy. You've placed significant reliance on a dog named Ranger, correct?" "Ranger is a certified therapy dog who's helped Emma make incredible progress." "Yes or no, Mr. Carter? Do you rely on this animal for your daughter's emotional well-being?" "Ranger is part of Emma's treatment plan." "Your Honor, please instruct the witness to answer yes or no." Judge Reynolds looked at David. "Mr. Carter, answer the question asked." David took a breath. "Yes, Ranger helps Emma." "And if something happened to this dog, if it became ill or aggressive or had to be removed for any reason, what then?" The question hung in the air like a threat. David's mind raced to Emma's face when she was with Ranger, the peace the dog brought her, the words that flowed when she spoke to him. "Then we deal with it. But Ranger is healthy, well-trained, and essential to Emma's healing right now." "Right now," Blackwood repeated. "But you're banking your daughter's recovery on an animal that could disappear tomorrow, whereas my client offers stability, human companionship, professional resources." "Objection." Jessica was on her feet again. "Counsel is testifying, not questioning." "Sustained." Mr. Blackwood asked questions. But the damage was done. Blackwood had painted David as a man with a dangerous job, irregular hours, and questionable judgment about his daughter's care. When David stepped down from the witness stand, he felt like he'd just lost a battle he hadn't known how to fight. The morning session ended with Blackwood calling Margaret to the stand. She was perfect, composed, articulate, presenting as a concerned grandmother motivated purely by love. She spoke of her experience as an educator, her stable home, her retired status that meant unlimited time for Emma. "Mrs. Hayes, what are your concerns about Emma's current situation?" Blackwood asked gently. Margaret's eyes glistened with carefully controlled tears. I'm worried about her development. She's not speaking normally. She's isolated. David is doing his best, but he's overwhelmed. I have the time, the resources, the experience to give Emma what she needs: structure, educational enrichment, consistency. I just want my granddaughter to thrive. And would you maintain Emma's relationship with her father? Of course. David would have generous visitation. This isn't about keeping them apart, it's about giving Emma the stable foundation she needs right now. It sounded so reasonable, so caring. David watched several people in the gallery nodding sympathetically. Even Judge Reynolds seemed to be listening with more openness than she'd shown during David's testimony. Jessica's cross-examination tried to establish that Margaret had always disapproved of David, that this was motivated by control rather than concern. But Margaret remained unflappable, insisting she only wanted what was best for Emma. She even managed to make her objection to Ranger sound reasonable. It's not that I dislike dogs, Miss Torres. I simply believe a child needs human connection to develop properly. Emma is 3 years old. She should be learning to communicate with people, not retreating into a relationship with an animal. Court recessed for lunch. David couldn't eat. He sat in the courthouse cafeteria, staring at a sandwich while Jessica reviewed her notes. "The afternoon will be better," Jessica promised. "We have Dr. Morrison, your captain, Mrs. Chen. We'll show Emma's progress, your dedication as a father." But David felt the foundation crumbling beneath him. Blackwood was too good, too polished. And the worst part was that Margaret genuinely believed she was right. She truly thought she could provide better for Emma. David couldn't even hate her for it. At 1:30, court reconvened. Jessica called her first witness, Captain Marcus Williams. Marcus, in his dress uniform, cut an impressive figure. He testified passionately about David's character, his dedication to both his job and his daughter. "David Carter is one of the finest men I've ever served with," Marcus said firmly. "He's never missed one of Emma's appointments. He trades shifts to be at her school events. He's raising that little girl with more love and commitment than most two-parent households I've seen." Blackwood's cross-examination was brief but effective. "Captain Williams, you're Mr. Carter's friend, are you not?" "I'm his commanding officer." "But also his friend. You socialize outside of work." "Yes." "So your testimony might be somewhat biased in his favor." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I'm testifying to facts, not feelings." "Of course, no further questions." Mrs. Chen was next, a tiny 72-year-old woman who'd emigrated from Taiwan 40 years ago. Her English was accented but clear, her love for Emma evident in every word. "Emma is like my own granddaughter," Mrs. Chen said. "I watch her when David works. We bake cookies, read books, play with Ranger. She talks to me now, not much but some. She's happy child. David is good father." But under Blackwood's cross-examination, Mrs. Chen admitted she had no formal childcare training, no background checks, no licensing. Blackwood made it sound negligent rather than neighborly. Then Dr. Rachel Morrison took the stand, and the energy in the courtroom shifted. Dr. Morrison was impressive. Credentials from Johns Hopkins, 20 years of clinical experience, published research on childhood trauma. She testified about Emma's diagnosis, her treatment plan, and the extraordinary progress made since Ranger's arrival. "In my professional opinion, Emma is healing," Dr. Morrison said firmly. "She's processing her trauma in a safe, supportive environment. The bond with Ranger has been transformative, disrupting that now could cause severe regression, potentially undoing months of progress." Blackwood stood for cross-examination, but for the first time he seemed slightly less confident. "Dr. Morrison, isn't it unusual to rely so heavily on an animal for a child's therapy?" Animal-assisted therapy is evidence-based and widely accepted in trauma treatment. Ranger isn't replacing human therapy, he's enhancing it. Emma sees me weakly, but Ranger provides something I can't: constant, judgment-free companionship that allows Emma to feel safe enough to begin healing. But surely the goal is for Emma to eventually not need this dog. Dr. Morrison's eyes flashed. The goal is for Emma to heal from watching her mother die. If Ranger facilitates that healing, then he's doing exactly what he should be doing. We don't take away crutches before broken bones heal, Mr. Blackwood. The courtroom was silent. Judge Reynolds leaned forward slightly, clearly interested. But before Dr. Morrison could continue, the courtroom door opened. Emma stood in the doorway. The social worker who'd been watching Emma in the waiting room stood frozen behind the little girl, her face pale with panic. Emma had somehow slipped away while the woman was distracted by a phone call. Now the 3-year-old stood in the courtroom doorway, still wearing her purple coat with the unicorn buttons, her blonde curls slightly messy, her blue eyes scanning the room with unusual intensity. "Emma," David half rose from his seat, his heart lurching. This wasn't supposed to happen. Children weren't allowed in custody hearings, especially not the children being fought over. Judge Reynolds had specifically ordered Emma to wait in the children's room with supervision. But Emma wasn't looking at her father. Her gaze was fixed on the empty witness stand, and more specifically, on Judge Reynolds sitting above it. The little girl who barely spoke to strangers, who whispered answers to her teachers, who'd spent 14 months locked in traumatic silence, took 3 steps into the courtroom. "I want to talk," Emma said, her voice clear and surprisingly strong for such a small person. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Blackwood shot to his feet, objecting loudly. Margaret gasped, one hand flying to her mouth. Jessica Torres looked between Emma and the judge, uncertain how to proceed. The court reporter's fingers froze above the stenography machine. The bailiff moved toward Emma, but Judge Reynolds raised her hand sharply. "Everyone stop," the judge commanded. Silence fell immediately. Judge Reynolds removed her glasses, set them on the bench, and studied the small figure standing in her courtroom. 18 years on the family court bench had taught her to recognize pivotal moments, and every instinct told her this was one. "Your Honor," Blackwood began, his voice tight with controlled frustration, "this is highly irregular. The child shouldn't even be in the courtroom. I must object." "Your objection is noted, Mr. Blackwood. Sit down." Judge Reynolds's tone left no room for argument. She looked at the social worker still standing in the doorway. "How did this happen?" "I apologize, Your Honor," the woman stammered. "I was on the phone with my supervisor and Emma was coloring. I looked away for maybe 30 seconds. "It's fine. Please close the door and remain in the hallway." Judge Reynolds waited until the door clicked shut, then turned her attention back to Emma. The little girl stood in the center of the courtroom, small and brave and completely out of place among the adult furniture and formal proceedings. Judge Reynolds had grandchildren. She knew how to talk to children. Slowly, carefully, she stood and stepped down from the bench, something she rarely did during active proceedings. She walked around to the front, her black robe rustling, and knelt down so she was closer to Emma's eye level, though she maintained a respectful distance. "Hello," Judge Reynolds said gently. That was quite an entrance. Emma studied the judge's face carefully, the way children do when determining if an adult is safe. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because her shoulders relaxed slightly. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Judge Reynolds asked, even though she obviously knew. "Emma Rose Carter." The little girl's voice was steady, though her hands twisted together nervously. "I'm 3.5 years old." "It's very nice to meet you, Emma. I'm Judge Reynolds. Do you know what a judge does?" Emma nodded. "You decide things, important things." "That's right. And right now, I'm trying to make a very important decision about you. But Emma, this is a place for grown-ups. You're supposed to be in the children's room with the nice lady." "I heard Daddy," Emma interrupted. Her eyes, the same blue as her mother's, found David across the courtroom. "I was drawing and I heard Daddy's voice through the door. He sounded sad. Really, really sad. The kind of sad he gets at nighttime when he thinks I'm sleeping but I'm not. David's vision blurred with tears. He'd had no idea Emma heard him crying on those difficult nights. Judge Reynolds glanced at David, then back to Emma. "What did you want to talk about, Emma?" "I want to talk about Ranger." Emma's voice grew stronger. "Everyone keeps talking about Ranger, but nobody asked him anything. And nobody asked me about him, not the real way." "The real way," Judge Reynolds echoed. "Grown-ups ask questions, but they don't really want to know the answers. They already decided what they think. But I know about Ranger. He's mine and I'm his, and we understand each other." Margaret made a soft sound, half sob, half gasp. Judge Reynolds held up a hand without looking away from Emma. "Tell me about Ranger," the judge said softly. Emma's face transformed. The nervousness faded, replaced by the kind of certainty only children possess when talking about something they love completely. "Ranger is a golden retriever. He's 6 years old. He was lost and sad before, but Michelle found him and made him into a helper dog. Then he came to help me." "Help you with what?" Emma's small hand stopped twisting. She looked down at her shoes, light-up sneakers with Velcro straps. "The crash," she whispered. "The crash that took Mommy away." The courtroom was so quiet that the heating system's hum seemed loud. Judge Reynolds waited, giving Emma space to continue at her own pace. "I remember the crash," Emma said, still looking at her shoes. "It was raining. The car was going fast and then it wasn't on the road anymore. Everything was spinning and there was glass everywhere and Mommy was making scared noises and then she stopped making any noises at all. And I couldn't make her wake up. I tried and tried, but she wouldn't wake up." David was crying openly now, his hands pressed against his mouth to stifle the sounds. Margaret's perfectly composed facade had crumbled entirely, tears streaming down her face. Even Blackwood looked affected, though he maintained his professional posture. Judge Reynolds blinked rapidly, maintaining her composure through decades of practice. "That sounds very scary, Emma." "It was the scariest thing ever." Emma looked up, meeting the judge's eyes. "After that, I didn't want to talk anymore. Talking didn't bring Mommy back. Talking didn't make the scary pictures in my head go away. So I stopped mostly. I only talked to Daddy sometimes because Daddy was sad too and I didn't want him to be alone sad." "That was very thoughtful of you." "But then Ranger came." Emma's expression brightened like sun breaking through clouds. "Daddy brought him home and Ranger came right to me. He looked at me like he understood about being scared and sad. And you know what?" "What?" "He didn't need me to talk. He just needed me to be there. So I started being there more. I stopped hiding inside my head all the time because Ranger was outside my head and he was soft and warm and good." Judge Reynolds felt something catch in her throat. In 18 years of custody cases, she'd heard countless expert testimonies, psychological evaluations, and parental arguments. But this 3-year-old simple explanation of trauma and healing was more powerful than all of them combined. "When I have bad dreams about the crash," Emma continued, "Ranger knows before I even wake up all the way. He jumps on my bed and puts his head right here." She pressed both hands against her chest, "and his heaviness makes the scared feeling smaller. And I put my hands in his fur and it's soft and I can feel him breathing, and I remember that I'm in my bed, not in the crash. I'm safe." "Does Ranger help you with other things?" Emma nodded vigorously. "He helps me be brave. At school, when all the kids are loud and I want to hide, I think about Ranger waiting at home for me. Sometimes he comes to school on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then I can actually be there without feeling like the walls are too close. And at night, I read him stories. I'm not very good at reading yet, but Ranger doesn't care. He just listens." Judge Reynolds glanced at Dr. Morrison, who was nodding almost imperceptibly, clearly recognizing every therapeutic element Emma was describing. "Emma," the judge said carefully, "do you understand why your grandmother wants you to live with her?" Emma's brow furrowed in thought. Grandma thinks Daddy can't take good enough care of me because he has to go fight fires, and she thinks Ranger is just a dog, not a real helper. Is that how you feel, that Daddy doesn't take good care of you? No, Emma's response was immediate and emphatic. Daddy takes the best care of me. He makes my breakfast every morning before school, usually pancakes shaped like hearts or stars. He helps me brush my teeth, and he does the voices different for all the characters when he reads bedtime stories. He lets me put my cold feet on his legs when we watch movies. He came to my school when I was scared during the fire drill, even though he was supposed to be sleeping because he worked all night. He never misses tucking me in, even when he's really, really tired. David buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Jessica placed a gentle hand on his arm. And when Daddy has to go to work, Emma continued, Mrs. Chen takes care of me. She's teaching me to make dumplings. She tells me stories about when she was a little girl in Taiwan. She's not as good as Daddy at the bedtime story voices, but she tries really hard. And she loves Ranger almost as much as I do. Judge Reynolds found herself smiling despite the gravity of the situation. You seem very happy with your life right now. I am happy. Not all the way happy like before Mommy died, but more happy than I was before Ranger came. And Daddy says that's okay, that happy comes back slowly like the sun coming up in the morning, not all at once. That's very wise. Emma took a small step closer to the judge. I love Grandma. She's nice and her house is pretty and she makes really good cookies with chocolate chips, but Ranger can't live there. Grandma says dogs are messy and they smell and they have germs. She says I need to focus on people, not animals. But Ranger isn't just an animal, he's. Emma struggled to find the words for what she felt. Judge Reynolds waited patiently. He's my heart helper, Emma finally said. That's what Dr. Rachel calls him. He helps my heart feel safer so it can get better from being broken. And if I go live at Grandma's house without Ranger, my heart won't have its helper anymore. And I think, Emma's voice dropped to a whisper, but in the silent courtroom, everyone heard every word. I think I'd stop talking again, because without Ranger, I wouldn't feel safe enough for the words to come out. The impact of that simple statement hit like a physical force. Margaret let out a choked sob. Blackwood sat very still, his expression unreadable. Jessica Torres scribbled notes frantically, though tears were running down her face. Judge Reynolds straightened slowly, her knees protesting the extended kneeling. She looked at this extraordinary little girl who'd found the courage to walk into a courtroom full of adults and advocate for herself, with more eloquence than most lawyers possessed. Emma, Judge Reynolds said quietly, would you like Ranger to come into the courtroom? Emma's entire face lit up. Really? He can come in here. I think, the judge said slowly, that it would be helpful for me to see you and Ranger together. Would that be okay? Yes, please. Judge Reynolds looked at the bailiff. Please retrieve the dog from Mr. Carter's vehicle. I believe he's in the parking lot. David found his voice, though it was rough with emotion. Yes, Your Honor. Blue pickup truck, row 3. He's in a crate with water. The windows are cracked. Bailiff, please escort Mr. Carter to retrieve the animal. Judge Reynolds looked around the courtroom. We'll take a 15-minute recess. When we reconvene, I want to see this therapy dog that's at the center of so much testimony. As the bailiff led David out, Emma remained standing in the middle of the courtroom, a small figure in a purple coat, completely unaware that she just delivered the most powerful testimony Judge Catherine Reynolds had heard in nearly 2 decades on the bench. The 15-minute recess felt like an eternity. Emma stood near the bailiff's desk, swinging her legs nervously, her eyes fixed on the courtroom door. Margaret had asked to approach her granddaughter, but Judge Reynolds had quietly suggested everyone maintain their positions until court reconvened. The judge had seen too many cases derailed by emotional confrontations during breaks. Jessica Torres used the time to huddle with Dr. Morrison in the hallway. Did you know Emma could articulate her feelings like that? Jessica whispered urgently. Dr. Morrison shook her head, looking stunned. In our sessions, she's made tremendous progress, but it's usually through play therapy or simple statements. What just happened in there? That level of self-awareness and verbal expression. That's extraordinary for a 3-year-old, even one who hasn't experienced trauma. Will it be enough? Dr. Morrison's expression was cautious. Judge Reynolds is clearly moved, but Blackwood built a strong case about stability and resources. I honestly don't know. In the parking lot, David's hands shook as he unlocked his truck. Ranger was alert in his crate, tail wagging at the sight of his person. "Hey, buddy," David said softly, opening the crate. "You're about to do the most important thing you've ever done. Emma needs you. I need you. Please, please show them what you mean to her." Ranger tilted his head, those intelligent amber eyes seeming to understand the gravity of the moment. David clipped on Ranger's service dog vest, something he didn't always use at home, but that made the dog's official status clear. The green vest had "Therapy Dog" embroidered on both sides, along with a patch reading, "Do not pet working." As David led Ranger through the courthouse hallways, people stopped and stared. Dogs weren't common in the building, and a golden retriever in full-service regalia drew attention. Ranger walked in perfect heel position, ignoring the distractions, focused and professional. The bailiff, a gruff man named Dennis who'd worked courthouse security for 20 years, looked at the dog with newfound respect. "Well-trained animal," Dennis observed as they rode the elevator. "He's special," David said simply. When they reached the courtroom, Dennis opened the door slightly. "Your Honor, Mr. Carter and the dog are here." "Send them in. Everyone else, please return to your seats. Court is back in session." David entered first, and the moment Ranger crossed the threshold, Emma's face transformed. She'd been sitting in the gallery where the bailiff had placed her, looking small and uncertain. But seeing Ranger, she slid off the bench and started toward him. "Emma, wait," Judge Reynolds said gently. The little girl froze. "I'd like you to come up here with Ranger if that's okay. Can you both come stand near my bench?" Emma looked at her father, who nodded encouragingly. She walked to Ranger, her small hand automatically going to the dog's head. Ranger's tail wagged slowly, and he leaned against her legs, a gesture David had seen hundreds of times. The dog was providing stability, literally and figuratively. Together, Emma and Ranger approached the bench. Judge Reynolds had again stepped down to their level, sitting in the court clerk's chair so she could observe them more closely. The entire courtroom watched in absolute silence. "Hello, Ranger," Judge Reynolds said. The dog's ears perked forward, attentive but calm. "Emma, can you show me how Ranger helps you?" Emma nodded. "When I'm scared, he does this." She wrapped her arms around Ranger's neck, and the dog immediately responded, pressing closer to her, his body language shifting from alert to comforting. His tail stopped wagging. His breathing slowed. He became completely still except for the gentle rise and fall of his chest. "And when I have bad dreams," Emma continued, demonstrating even though there was no bed present, "he puts his head right here." She guided Ranger's head to rest against her chest. The dog complied perfectly, applying gentle pressure. Emma's hands went to his fur, fingers threading through the golden coat. "See, the weight makes the scared feeling smaller." Judge Reynolds leaned forward, fascinated. She'd seen service dogs before, PTSD dogs for veterans, seizure alert dogs, mobility assistance dogs. But seeing the subtle, sophisticated way Ranger responded to Emma's needs was remarkable. The dog wasn't just trained, he was genuinely attuned to this child. "What else does Ranger do?" the judge asked. "Sometimes I get really worried about things. My tummy feels funny and my hands get shaky and I can't breathe right. Daddy calls them anxiety attacks. When that happens, Ranger knows before I even tell him." Emma looked down at the dog. "Show them, Ranger." As if on cue, though David knew no cue had been given, Ranger shifted position. He moved to sit directly in front of Emma, facing her, and placed one paw on her leg. The gesture was clearly practiced, clearly purposeful. When he does this, Emma explained, I'm supposed to look at his eyes and breathe with him. Watch. She made eye contact with Ranger. Breathe, Ranger. The dog took a deep, visible breath, his chest expanding. Emma matched it, inhaling deeply. They exhaled together. Again. Again. After 4 breaths, Ranger removed his paw and licked Emma's hand once, a release signal David recognized from Michelle's training descriptions. That's called grounding, Dr. Morrison spoke up from the gallery, unable to stay silent. Your Honor, if I may, that's an advanced anxiety management technique. Ranger is performing what we call behavioral interruption. When Emma begins to spiral into anxiety, he redirects her attention to something concrete and controllable: breathing, eye contact, physical touch. It's extraordinarily effective and usually takes years to train. Judge Reynolds nodded slowly, processing this. She looked at Emma. Does this happen a lot, the anxiety attacks? Not as much as before, Emma said. Dr. Rachel says I'm getting better, but sometimes things remind me of the crash. Like sirens, or when it rains really hard, or when Daddy's late coming home. Then my brain gets scared even when I'm actually safe. But Ranger helps my brain remember that I'm okay. The judge turned her attention to Ranger himself. She'd been a judge long enough to develop strong instincts about credibility, who was genuine, who was performing. This dog wasn't performing. His focus on Emma was absolute. His responses to her touch, her voice, her needs were authentic and immediate. Mr. Blackwood, Judge Reynolds said, not taking her eyes off Emma and Ranger, do you have questions for this witness? Blackwood stood slowly. He looked at Emma, at the dog, at the entire courtroom watching him. Thomas Blackwood had built a career on winning, on aggressive advocacy, on finding weaknesses and exploiting them. He was about to cross-examine a 3-year-old about her emotional support animal in front of a judge who clearly was affected by what she was seeing. He made a calculation. No questions, Your Honor. A ripple of surprise moved through the courtroom. Jessica Torr's head snapped up in shock. Even Judge Reynolds looked mildly surprised, though she recovered quickly. Very well, Mrs. Hayes, would you like to approach? Margaret stood on trembling legs. She walked slowly toward her granddaughter, and Emma watched her come with uncertain eyes. Ranger positioned himself slightly in front of Emma, not aggressively but protectively. Judge Reynolds had seen this moment before in various forms, the moment when someone's firmly held beliefs collided with undeniable reality. She watched it happen now on Margaret Hayes's face. Margaret knelt down, her expensive suit wrinkling against the floor, and looked at her granddaughter. Really looked at her. Not at the silent, withdrawn child she'd been projecting her fears onto, but at the actual Emma standing before her, a little girl who was healing, who was brave, who was loved. Oh, sweetheart, Margaret whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't understand. I miss your mommy so much, and I thought if I could take care of you the way I took care of her. The words dissolved into tears. Emma reached out with one small hand and touched her grandmother's wet cheek. You can take care of me, Grandma. You already do. You make me cookies and you teach me numbers and you let me play dress-up with your pretty scarves. But I can't live at your house. Because of Ranger, Margaret said, finally truly understanding. Because of Ranger and Daddy. They're my family now. After Mommy went away, Daddy and Ranger put the pieces back together. Not all the pieces. Some pieces are gone forever because Mommy took them with her, but enough pieces to make me feel whole again. Margaret looked at the dog who'd accomplished what she, with all her resources and experience, hadn't been able to do. Ranger met her gaze calmly, without judgment. In that moment, something shifted in Margaret Hayes. The rigid certainty that had driven her custody petition crumbled. You're right, Margaret said softly to Emma. You should stay with Daddy and Ranger. I was wrong, baby girl, I was so wrong. She looked up at Judge Reynolds, tears streaming freely now. Your Honor, I'd like to withdraw my petition for custody. The courtroom erupted in whispered conversations. Blackwood's face remained neutral, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. David made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Judge Reynolds raised her hand for silence. "Mrs. Hayes, are you certain? This is a significant decision." Margaret stood, helping Emma up with her. "I've never been more certain of anything. I let my grief make me blind. I thought I knew what Emma needed, but I was wrong. She needs her father. She needs Ranger. She needs the life they've built together." She looked at David across the courtroom. "I'm sorry. I'm so very sorry." David stood, crossing the space between them. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Two people who'd both loved Sarah, who both loved Emma, who'd let pain drive them to opposite corners. "I know you meant well," David said quietly. "And Emma needs her grandmother. We can work this out, Margaret, not in court together." Judge Reynolds watched this unfold with a mixture of relief and professional satisfaction. These were the outcomes she hoped for but rarely saw: people choosing healing over winning, connection over control. "If both parties are in agreement," the judge said, "I'd like to propose a formal arrangement. Not a custody modification, but a structured visitation and co-parenting plan that ensures Emma maintains strong relationships with both her father and her grandmother." She looked at Emma, still standing between Margaret and Ranger. "Would that be okay with you, Emma? If Grandma visited you regularly, maybe you stayed at her house sometimes, but you lived with Daddy and Ranger." Emma considered this seriously. "Can Ranger come to Grandma's house when I visit?" Margaret smiled through her tears. "I think we can make that work. I might even get a dog of my own, a friend for Ranger." Emma's eyes went wide. "Really? Really? Maybe you can help me pick one out." "Yes," Emma bounced excitedly, and Ranger's tail wagged in response to her joy. Judge Reynolds returned to her bench, making notes. "Mr. Blackwood, Miss Torres, I'd like you both to work together on a formal agreement. I want to see provisions for regular visitation, holiday schedules, and I want Dr. Morrison's continued involvement documented. I also want it explicitly stated that Ranger remains with Emma as part of her ongoing therapy." She looked at Emma one more time. "Young lady, you are one of the bravest people I've ever met. You walked into a scary place and told your truth. That took tremendous courage." Emma smiled shyly. "Ranger helped. I knew if I could just get to Daddy, and if Daddy could bring Ranger, then everyone would understand." "Well, you were right. Everyone does understand now." As the hearing concluded with agreements to finalize paperwork within the week, David knelt beside his daughter and her dog. Emma threw her arms around his neck, and Ranger pressed against both of them, completing their circle. "We did it, Daddy," Emma whispered. "We stayed together." "We did, baby girl. We absolutely did." Judge Catherine Reynolds sat alone in her chambers after the hearing, still wearing her black robe, a cup of coffee cooling on her desk. She dismissed everyone an hour ago with instructions to return in 1 week for the formal finalization of the co-parenting agreement, but she couldn't quite shake the weight of what she'd witnessed. In 18 years on the bench, she developed thick skin. She'd learned to compartmentalize, to make decisions based on law and evidence rather than emotion. But Emma Carter's testimony had cracked something open inside her, a reminder of why she'd chosen family law in the first place, before the endless cycle of bitter divorces and custody battles had calcified her heart. She pulled out a legal pad and began writing her formal decision, though the outcome was no longer in question. The withdrawal of Margaret's petition meant there would be no custody transfer, but Judge Reynolds wanted everything documented properly. More than that, she wanted to create a framework that would protect Emma's healing while honoring Margaret's genuine love for her granddaughter. The next week crawled by for David. He returned to work but couldn't focus. During a routine inspection at a warehouse, Captain Marcus pulled him aside. "You're going to get yourself hurt if you don't get your head straight," Marcus said firmly. "What's going on? I thought the hearing went well." "It did. Margaret withdrew her petition, but I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for her to change her mind, for a technicality to appear. I can't believe we're actually safe until that judge signs the final order. Marcus gripped his shoulder. Brother, you've got to have a little faith. That little girl of yours walked into a courtroom and moved a mountain. Trust that. At home, life continued with careful normalcy. Emma seemed lighter, freer, as if some invisible weight had lifted from her small shoulders. She chattered more, not constantly, but more than before. She'd started playing with children at preschool instead of just alongside them. Mrs. Rodriguez called David with tears in her voice to report that Emma had raised her hand during circle time and answered a question out loud, not whispered. "What did she say?" David asked. "We were talking about families, and I asked what makes a family special. Emma said, families help each other not be scared." David, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Margaret called twice that week. The conversations were awkward at first. Decades of tension and grief didn't disappear overnight, but they were trying. "I've been looking at rescue dogs," Margaret told David during their second call. "There's a senior beagle at the shelter who's been there for 6 months. Nobody wants older dogs, apparently, but I thought, maybe that's exactly who I should get. Someone who needs a second chance like Ranger had." "Emma would love that," David said, and meant it. "When are you going to meet him?" "Saturday. I was hopping. Would you and Emma want to come with me? I'd value her opinion." David felt something ease in his chest. "We'd like that." Dr. Morrison's weekly session with Emma that Thursday was particularly illuminating. Emma had brought drawings she'd made, pictures of her family. There was David, tall with firefighter gear. There was Ranger, golden and smiling. There was Mrs. Chen with her apron. And there was Margaret, standing slightly apart but included, a cookie in her hand. "Tell me about your picture," Dr. Morrison said. "That's my family," Emma explained. "Daddy and Ranger live with me every day. Mrs. Chen takes care of me when Daddy fights fires, and Grandma visits and makes cookies and loves me even though she was confused for a while." Confused. She thought love meant keeping me in one place. But Daddy and Ranger taught me that love means helping someone be brave. Grandma knows that now. Dr. Morrison made notes, marveling at the emotional intelligence this child was developing. "Emma, do you still have scary dreams about the crash?" Emma nodded. "Sometimes, but not as much. And when I do, Ranger is there. And I'm starting to remember good things about Mommy too, not just the scary things." "Like what?" "Like how she used to sing in the car. She had a silly voice when she sang and it always made me laugh. And how she smelled like vanilla because of her lotion. And how she'd make up funny names for my stuffed animals." Emma smiled, the memory bringing joy instead of pain. "Ranger helps me remember the good things. When I pet him and tell him about Mommy, the good memories get bigger and the scared memories get smaller." On Saturday, the Carter family, David, Emma, and Ranger, met Margaret at the Memphis Animal Shelter. Robert Hayes came too, Margaret's quiet husband who'd watched from the sidelines during the custody battle, but who seemed relieved everything had resolved peacefully. The senior beagle Margaret had mentioned was named Biscuit, a 9-year-old with soulful brown eyes and graying fur around his muzzle. He'd been surrendered when his elderly owner moved to a nursing home. Biscuit moved slowly, arthritis affecting his back legs, but his tail wagged hopefully when they approached his kennel. "Oh," Margaret breathed, seeing him. "Oh, you sweet thing." The shelter volunteer, a young woman named Kayla, opened the kennel. Biscuit ambled out, immediately going to Margaret and leaning against her legs. It was a gesture of trust, of choosing, of connection. Emma knelt down carefully. "Hi, Biscuit, I'm Emma, this is Ranger, we're going to be friends." Ranger, ever the professional therapy dog, approached Biscuit with perfect manners, a gentle sniff, a slight tail wag, a respectful distance. Biscuit responded in kind, and within moments, the two dogs were touching noses like old friends. "They like each other," Emma announced with satisfaction. "Grandma, you should definitely adopt Biscuit. He needs a home and you need a dog and he's perfect." Margaret laughed, the first genuine, unguarded laugh David had heard from her in years. "Then I suppose it's decided." The adoption paperwork took an hour. During that time, Emma sat on the floor with both dogs, reading them a story from a book the shelter kept in the lobby. Ranger rested his head in Emma's lap while Biscuit settled beside her, and Margaret watched with tears in her eyes. "I've been such a fool," Margaret said quietly to David as they stood watching. "I was so focused on what I thought was proper care, schedules and nutrition and educational enrichment, that I completely missed what actually mattered." "You weren't a fool," David said. "You were grieving, we both were. We just grieved differently. I blamed you, for the accident. It wasn't rational, you weren't even there. But I needed someone to blame and you were available." David was silent for a moment. "I blamed myself. If I hadn't been working that night, if I'd been driving instead of Sarah, if I'd insisted on new tires sooner, his voice cracked. "I've had a lot of ifs." Margaret reached out and squeezed his hand. "Sarah loved you, she chose you, and she'd be so proud of the father you've been to Emma." On Wednesday morning, the final hearing was brief and procedural. Judge Reynolds reviewed the co-parenting agreement that Jessica Torres and Thomas Blackwood had drafted together. Margaret would have Emma every Wednesday evening for dinner and every other weekend. Holidays would be split equitably. Both households would support Emma's continued therapy with Dr. Morrison and her bond with Ranger. Any future disagreements would be resolved through mediation before returning to court. "This is an excellent agreement," Judge Reynolds said, reviewing the final document. "It prioritizes Emma's needs while honoring the important relationships in her life. Mrs. Hayes, I commend you for your courage in recognizing what your granddaughter truly needed." Margaret stood. "Your Honor, if I may, I want to thank you for allowing Emma to speak that day. I'd built such a strong case in my own mind about what was best. I needed to hear her truth to break through my certainty." Judge Reynolds smiled. "Sometimes the wisest voices in family court are the smallest ones. I've learned to listen." She signed the order with a flourish. "This agreement is hereby approved and entered into the court record. Mr. Carter, Mrs. Hayes, I hope to never see either of you in my courtroom again, at least not for custody disputes." "You won't, Your Honor," David promised. Outside the courtroom in the cold January sunshine, David knelt beside Emma. "How do you feel, baby girl?" Emma considered the question seriously. "Happy and safe and like everything's going to be okay now." "It is going to be okay, I promise." "I know, Daddy, Ranger told me." David smiled. "Oh, he did. What did he say?" Emma giggled. "He didn't use words, silly. He used his eyes and his tail and his heart. That's how dogs talk. They say, 'I love you and you're safe,' without any words at all." That evening, the first Wednesday under the new arrangement, Margaret picked Emma up for dinner. Biscuit was in the car, wearing a new collar Emma had helped pick out. Emma brought Ranger along. The agreement specified she could bring her therapy dog to Margaret's house whenever she wanted. "We're having spaghetti and meatballs," Margaret told Emma as she buckled her into the car seat. "And I bought ingredients for cookies. I thought maybe you could teach Biscuit about being a helper dog the way Ranger is." "Biscuit is old, Grandma. He can just be a friend dog. That's important too." "You're absolutely right, sweetheart. A friend dog is perfect." As Margaret's car pulled away, David felt something he hadn't felt in the 18 months since Sarah's death: peace. Not the absence of grief, but the presence of hope existing alongside it. His daughter was healing. His relationship with his mother-in-law was mending. The life they'd built together, him, Emma, Ranger, Mrs. Chen, and now Margaret and Biscuit and Robert, wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was good. It was whole. It was theirs. Inside, David's phone rang. It was Captain Marcus. "Hey, I heard it's official. Congratulations, brother." "Thanks, Marcus, it feels surreal." Listen, the guys at the station want to do something for Emma. We were thinking about organizing a thank you for Ranger, maybe an honorary firefighter ceremony. The department's done it for a few service dogs before. What do you think?" David's throat tightened with emotion. "I think Emma would love that." "Good, we'll set it up for next month. And David, take the rest of the week off. You've been through hell. Spend time with that miracle kid of yours." That night David couldn't sleep. He walked to Emma's room and stood in the doorway, watching his daughter sleep with Ranger on the floor beside her bed. The dog's ears perked up at David's presence, but he didn't move, maintaining his vigil. "Thank you," David whispered to Ranger. "Thank you for giving her back to me." Ranger's tail thumped twice against the floor. Acknowledgement, understanding, connection. David returned to his own bed and for the first time since the night of Sarah's death, slept through until morning without nightmares, without anxiety, without fear. His family was safe. His daughter was healing. The future, which had seemed so terrifyingly uncertain, now held possibility. In her pristine Germantown home, Margaret Hayes sat in her late daughter's bedroom for the last time before converting it into a proper guest room for Emma's overnight visits. She held one of Sarah's old sweaters, breathing in the faint scent that remained. "I understand now, sweetheart," she whispered to her absent daughter. "I understand what you saw in David. I understand what love really means. And I promise I'll help take care of our girl, but I'll do it the right way this time. I'll do it with an open heart instead of clenched fists." Biscuit padded into the room and sat beside Margaret's chair, resting his graying head on her knee. She stroked his soft ears, and for the first time since losing Sarah, Margaret Hayes felt something other than desperate, controlling grief. She felt grateful. 6 months later, the spring sunshine transformed Memphis into a canvas of blooming dogwoods and azaleas. The city shook off winter's gray blanket, and with it, the Carter family emerged into a new chapter that felt less like survival and more like actual living. Emma turned 4 years old on a brilliant May morning. Her birthday party was held at Overton Park, under the sprawling oak trees where she'd once sat in silent isolation. Now, she ran through the grass with 7 children from her preschool class, her laughter ringing out like music David had feared he'd never hear again. Ranger bounded alongside the children, his service vest removed for the day, just a happy dog playing with kids who adored him. Biscuit, moving more slowly but with equal enthusiasm, waddled after them, his tail wagging constantly. The 2 dogs had become inseparable during Emma's visits to Margaret's house, forming their own friendship that mirrored the healing happening in the human family. "She's remarkable," Dr. Rachel Morrison said, standing beside David near the picnic tables laden with birthday cake and presents. "In my 20 years of practice, I've never seen a child recover from selective mutism this completely. Emma's not just speaking. She's thriving socially, emotionally, cognitively. She's exceeded every therapeutic goal we set." David watched his daughter organize the other children into some elaborate game involving pretending to be different animals. She assigned roles with confidence, negotiated disagreements with surprising emotional intelligence, and included everyone with natural kindness. "I can't take credit," David said. "Ranger did the heavy lifting." "Ranger provided the foundation of safety," Dr. Morrison corrected gently. "But you provided the love, the consistency, the willingness to try something unconventional. And Margaret," she nodded toward where Margaret was helping Mrs. Chen set out paper plates, "she provided the humility to admit when she was wrong and the courage to change course." Margaret had transformed over the past 6 months in ways David wouldn't have thought possible. The rigid, controlling woman who'd sued for custody had softened into a grandmother who got down on the floor to play, who didn't flinch when Biscuit tracked muddy paw prints across her pristine floors, who'd learned that love meant flexibility rather than structure. She approached David now, Biscuit ambling beside her. "I wanted to show you something." She pulled out her phone, scrolling to a photo. Biscuit passed his therapy dog certification test yesterday. David stared at the image, Biscuit wearing a green therapy dog vest identical to Ranger's, sitting proudly beside a beaming Margaret. You got Biscuit certified. Emma inspired me. She talked about how Ranger helps people, and I thought, why shouldn't Biscuit do the same? He's older, slower, but he's so gentle. We've been volunteering at Westwood Elementary, my old school. He sits with children who are having difficult days, and Margaret's expression grew tender, and he helps them the way Ranger helped Emma, the way he's helped me. Margaret, that's incredible. It's given me purpose again. After I retired, after Sarah died, I felt so lost. I tried to fill that void by controlling Emma's life. But this, actually helping children who need it, this fills the void in a healthy way. Captain Marcus Williams arrived with several firefighters from Station 19, all in dress uniforms. They'd come for the special ceremony they'd promised David months ago. Marcus carried a small box, and when he whistled to get everyone's attention, the party quieted. "If I can have Emma Carter up here, please," Marcus called out. Emma ran over, curious and excited. David joined her, and Ranger, sensing something important, trotted over and sat beside Emma in perfect position. "Emma," Marcus began, kneeling to her level, "a few months ago you did something incredibly brave. You spoke up when it mattered most, and you showed all of us what real courage looks like. But we also want to recognize someone else who's been brave, Ranger, your therapy dog who's helped you heal and who helps you every single day." Marcus opened the box, revealing a small firefighter's badge engraved with Ranger Honorary Firefighter Station 19, Memphis Fire Department. Emma's eyes went wide. Ranger gets to be a firefighter like Daddy. "An honorary one," Marcus confirmed. "Because just like firefighters run toward danger to help people, Ranger runs toward pain to help you. That makes him a hero in our book." The firefighters saluted as Marcus pinned the badge to Ranger's collar. The dog sat perfectly still, as if he understood the significance of the moment. Emma threw her arms around Ranger's neck, and the assembled crowd erupted in applause. "Speech, speech," one of the children called out, and the others took up the chant. Emma stood and the crowd quieted. She looked around at all the faces, her father, her grandmother, Mrs. Chen, Dr. Morrison, her school friends, the firefighters. 6 months ago, this would have been impossible. Now she took a breath and spoke clearly. "Thank you for making Ranger a firefighter. He's the best dog in the whole world, and he saved me when I was really, really sad and scared. He taught me that it's okay to be scared sometimes, and it's okay to be sad about Mommy being gone. But it's also okay to be happy again. And I'm happy now, really happy." There wasn't a dry eye in the park. David pulled Emma into his arms, overwhelmed with gratitude and pride and love so fierce it hurt. The party continued with cake, chocolate with vanilla frosting, Emma's favorite, and presents and games. As the afternoon wore on and children were gradually picked up by their parents, Emma sat under an oak tree with both dogs, reading them a story from a new book she'd received. Jessica Torres, who'd been invited and had brought her own daughter to play, approached David. "I have news. Judge Reynolds is retiring next month." David looked surprised. Really, she seemed like she'd be on the bench forever. Apparently our case affected her more than we realized. She gave an interview to the Memphis Bar Association newsletter. Want to hear what she said? Jessica pulled up the article on her phone and read aloud. "In my final year on the bench, I was reminded why I chose family law. A 3-year-old taught me that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply listen, truly listen, to the people our decisions affect. That child's courage to speak her truth, and her family's courage to heal together, showed me that the best outcomes happen when we honor love over law, flexibility over rigidity, and healing over winning. I'm retiring because I want to end my career on that note of hope, rather than risk becoming too cynical to hear the next Emma Carter who walks into my courtroom." David felt his throat tighten. Wow. She's recommending changes to how Tennessee family courts handle cases involving children with trauma and service animals. Emma's testimony is literally changing policy. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, only the core family remained: David, Emma, Margaret, Robert, Mrs. Chen, and both dogs. They sat together on blankets, watching Emma chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "I've been thinking," Margaret said quietly, "about starting a foundation, in Sarah's name, to provide therapy dogs to children who have experienced trauma but whose families can't afford them. There are so many Emmas out there who could benefit from their own rangers." David turned to look at his former adversary, now his co-parent and friend. "Sarah would love that. Would you help me? You understand what these dogs can do in ways I'm still learning." "Absolutely. And maybe we can get Michelle Santos involved. She's the trainer who rescued and trained Ranger. She'd be perfect." Robert Hayes, who'd been mostly quiet throughout the celebration, spoke up. "I'd like to contribute too. I'm not good with the emotional stuff like Margaret is learning to be, but I'm good with numbers. I could handle the financial side, make sure the foundation is properly structured." Mrs. Chen smiled. "And I can volunteer. I'm retired. I have time. Maybe I help families who need someone to watch children while therapy dogs train with them." David looked around at this unlikely family they'd built from grief and conflict and love. Sarah would be so proud of all of us, not just for how we've helped Emma, but for how we've helped each other. Emma ran back to them, breathless and glowing, a captured firefly cupped gently in her hands. "Look, I caught one. Ranger, look." The dog stood and sniffed at her hands with interest. Emma opened them carefully, and the firefly escaped, blinking as it flew up into the darkening sky. "Make a wish, Emmy," David said, following the old tradition. Emma closed her eyes tight, her face scrunched in concentration. When she opened them, she was smiling. "I wish that every kid who's sad like I was gets their own ranger. Is that a good wish?" Margaret pressed a hand to her heart. "That's the best wish I've ever heard, sweetheart, and you know what? We're going to make it come true." That night, after the party cleanup was done and Emma was bathed and in her pajamas, David tucked her into bed. Ranger assumed his usual position on his bed on the floor, but Emma called him up. "Just for tonight," she said, "because it was such a special day." Ranger hopped onto the bed, circling once before settling beside her. Emma snuggled against his warm side, her fingers threading through his fur in the gesture that had become second nature. "Daddy," Emma said sleepily, "do you think Mommy knows about Ranger, about how he helped me?" David sat on the edge of the bed, stroking his daughter's hair. "I think Mommy knows everything, baby girl, and I think she's so happy that you found your way back to us." "I'm happy too, not the same happy as before Mommy died, a different kind of happy. The kind that knows sad things happen but good things happen too." "That's very wise, Emma. Ranger taught me. He was sad and alone before Michelle found him. But then he got a second chance and now he's happy and he helps people. We both got second chances, Daddy. That's pretty cool." David kissed her forehead. "It's very cool. I love you, Emma Rose." "I love you too, and I love Ranger, and Grandma and Biscuit, and Mrs. Chen and Captain Marcus, and," she yawned widely, "and everybody." Within minutes she was asleep, her breathing deep and even, free from the nightmares that had once plagued her. Ranger opened one eye to look at David, as if to say, "I've got this. You can go." David stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching his daughter sleep peacefully with her therapy dog. He thought about the journey they'd traveled, from that horrific night on the rain-slicked interstate, through Emma's silent grief, through the custody battle that had nearly torn them apart, to this moment of peace and healing. His phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Thank you for today. Thank you for everything. Sarah would be so proud of the father you are. I'm proud to share this journey with you." David typed back, "Thank you for loving her enough to let her stay. We're in this together." Another text came through, this one from Michelle Santos. "Heard about the honorary firefighter badge. Ranger always was destined for greatness. Give that special girl a hug from me." And finally, one from Dr. Morrison. "Emma's last session with me is next week. She's graduated from therapy. She doesn't need me anymore. It's been the honor of my career to witness her healing. That dog of yours is magic." David looked back at Emma and Ranger one more time. The dog sensed his gaze and lifted his head slightly, amber eyes glowing in the dim light from the hallway. In that moment, David could have sworn Ranger understood everything: the gratitude, the love, the miracle of what they'd accomplished together. "Thank you, buddy," David whispered. "Thank you for bringing her back to me." Ranger's tail thumped twice against the bed, and he returned his attention to Emma, resuming his eternal vigil. Outside, fireflies danced in the spring darkness. Inside, a little girl who'd found her voice slept peacefully, guarded by a dog who'd found his purpose. The story that had begun with tragedy had transformed into something beautiful, a testament to resilience, the healing power of unconditional love, and the extraordinary things that happen when we're brave enough to speak our truth, no matter how small our voice might be. Emma Carter had spoken in court, and her words had indeed shocked everyone. But more than that, they changed everything. And that change rippled outward, touching lives far beyond one courtroom, one family, one remarkable therapy dog. It was, David thought as he finally headed to his own bed, exactly the kind of second chance they all deserved. The kind where broken pieces don't disappear but instead form something new, something stronger for having been shattered and carefully, lovingly put back together. And somewhere, he liked to believe, Sarah was smiling.